Hello, this is John Alexis Guerra Gomez, and this is Northeastern University's web development course. And in the week 7, we are already. For this week, we are reaching the middle point of our course, and because of that, I wanted to give you like a little summary of some of the things that we have learned in the course using like a format that I used to use for preparing for exams and things like that, like a little min map. And this is going to be important for you to understand and remember like all of the things that we saw in here, but it might not be complete. I'm going to try to do it on the top of my head, so keep that in mind. And whenever you're doing one of these like yours, like always make it yours and try to see how to achieve that. So basically, the whole idea of this is that we can start by just saying like, what are the things that we have seen in web development? Right. Okay. So for this one, like the most important things we have seen in the course have been basically our like building blocks, I like calling them. And we can say this is going to be like a little bit smaller. And for these building blocks, these are going to include things like HTML, and then CSS, if I can spell, oh, come on, there we go. And then finally, JavaScript or ECMAScript 6. So I want you to remember that we are using the ECMAScript standard, starting with the version 6 and onwards, which actually gave us many different things, including things like modules that we're going to see in a minute. Okay, so let's make this a little bit smaller, maybe, so we can get cozier in here. Now, the other thing that we have been saying, and something that I also want you to remember, is that everything we have been doing, I'm always telling you, like every time you go and search for resources, like always go and look in the Mozilla Developer Network. So I'm going to remind you of that in here, and then let's connect these things. So all of the building blocks, and actually like pretty much everything in the course, we have been doing like that. Let's do that. There we go. And then so if you remember in the HTML, and then whenever we're saying or talking about this, what we refer is that HTML is going to be like the structure of the page, like the semantics of the page. Remember that we are not really going to be controlling how things look like. That's what you actually do on the CSS part. So this is going to be like the style, and then look and feel. And finally, in the JavaScript part or the ECMAScript part, we control the interactivity. So basically make the page do something beyond just showing something. It's what we do in there. In the HTML part, we actually cover a ton of different things, but we can start by just like the most basic piece of it. It is going to be like the HTML elements. And I want you to remember that whenever you're doing HTML elements, these are going to be of the form of something like this, and then this is the element name, and then this is an attribute, and this is a value. Usually these are going to be something like this, and then you are going to have something like that. Okay. Apart from that, the other things that are going to be like very typical in there, that you're going to have IDs and classes. And actually we can put that one, this maybe. So those are also going to be like very common. And remember that you use IDs. Usually you want to have only one ID, and then you could have like multiple classes for identifying elements in there. Then apart from those ones in there, then remember that we also have like certain types of elements that are like more like semantical. Like for instance, you have the head, And then you also have the body. And then remember that in here, you are going to have like all of the meta information. And then in here, you're going to be including like the actually content of the page. Okay. Apart from that, we also saw like a bunch of other tags that were very useful for organizing your web page. So something like, for instance, like inside the body, we can do things like sections or like footer, then the header, and then the main content, and then sections, and then articles, and then also other things like divs and spans. Okay. Another one that I think it is very useful and important, it's like the headers. Headers, so you're going to have H1, H2, H3, and so on and so forth. So these are going to be organizing our text. And remember, like only one H1. So remember that you want to have at least, like actually pretty much, not at least, but you should have one H1. This is actually going to be useful even for machine learning and stuff like that. Then there are other headers, like for instance URLs with list items. You can also change some of the parameters in there. Like for instance, if it is like a strong or blah blah. I'm not going to go into details in here, but remember that you're going to have those elements. And then finally, maybe, or actually something that is going to be very useful for us later, is what we call the DOM. And the DOM is basically a document object manipulator. And actually this one, when I do this one, I like putting it as a combination of HTML and JavaScript, because you actually use this one on JavaScript for modifying the look and feel of the actual HTML. And then the other one I wanted to mention in here, which is actually going to be very useful in here, is what it's called the box model. Okay, remember that the box model determines like how things are distributed on the screen, and is the one that includes like the margin and the padding and the border and the actual content and things like that. And it also is the one that determines that, for instance, when you put a div, it's going to break the flow versus just using like a span that it's going just to continue inline. There is a ton of other things that you want to learn in here, but I want to say these are kind of like the basics for it. Oh, the other ones that could be like very important in here is like links, and then images, and and another one, and I forgot that one in the one I showed you before, are the different HTML forms. Okay, so whenever you're doing forms, like the most important things that I like doing, it's like I like creating my labels, and inside the labels putting my inputs, which are the ones that I can use for interacting and adding different elements in there. You can also have like different buttons and things like that. Okay, so that's just as a general for that. Now, that's what I think we have in HTML. So if then we go into the CSS realm, we are going to be using the most important thing that I talked about in the course. It's bootstrap. I hope I am spelling that correctly. If not, pardon my English. And then, of course, you're also going to have like the most basic thing in CSS, which is kind of like the structure. So remember that you're always going to have like a CSS selector. And then from that selector, and actually, there we go. So in the selector, you're going to have like, I think it's called like an attribute. And then if I'm not mistaken, it's with colon, and then you say what is the actual value. Okay. This one is very important. Remember in here also, we have a rule that says that like speaking of important, like don't use it. important basically overrides all of the different elements of that, and then we can actually go and put this one here. So because of that, we don't want to use Bootstrap because, important, because it can make things really hard to debug and actually confuse. Like if you are trying to get a job as a full stack engineer, and if you have code that includes important, nobody's going to hire you. You also have to remember the CSS priority. Remember that the more specific your selectors are, like the more precedence is going to have, or like I think it can be called priority or precedence. And there is also like certain rules that tells you in what order they're usually applied. Something else that we can mention when we are talking about CSS is that there are 3 ways of including it. You can do inline CSS, you can do like use the style, and important to spell it correctly, style to use inside, and then you can also use the link with the type style sheet to include things, which is going to allow you to include local ones or like in a different file. In terms of the different selectors, the most common ones that you're going to be using are classes and then IDs, and then apart from that you can go and say parent and then descendant, and then hopefully we can do this like that so it doesn't break it, and then finally you can do parent and then child with something like this. You can also do sibling and then sibling with like plus. So these are all different operators, but then apart from that you can also use pseudo classes and pseudo classes and many others that can be extremely useful. So remember to include those in there. The Fox model also applies a lot in here, and then it's just a matter of understanding like the different elements that you can apply, or the different rules or attributes that can be changed. Another one I want to add in here, I just forgot. Oh yes, so there is a new model that it's called Flexbox, and you can use it. So I'm actually going to put it around here with Bootstrap. This is going to be the Flexbox and the grid layouts. So there are different displays that you can use, and pretty much I want to say these are making kind of obsolete things like Bootstrap. So keep those in mind as well. Okay. This one should be yes, perfect. So let's make these a little bit bigger. And what else? I think that's what I think of on the top of my head for CSS, and then JavaScript. In my opinion, it's very interesting. It's where you actually remember that this is the way that you encode different things. Like we can use things like for creating variables, you can use const and let, and let's make this smaller. So remember always to avoid var, so do not use that one. That looks ugly as hell. Then the other things is that what are the type of things you can create with those. So many different types of variables. So you have things like strings, and then numbers, and then booleans, and many others in there in the basic ones. But then apart from that, you also have arrays, and the arrays you have functions like map, filter, reduce, and many others in there. You can use also things like maps and sets. Let's put it like this, like maps and sets, which are like the more advanced elements in there. The other one that is very important is going to be like the different objects you can create. So for instance, for the arrays, like It's very critical that you remember that you create them using square brackets. For objects, you can create them using elements of these, like properties. And then, oh, that's one that I also forgot. Speaking of that, like another one that I find very useful to remember is that you can do for loops, and then you can have the for in and the for off. Okay, remember that you use this one with objects, and then you use this one with arrays, I guess, like or iterables actually, but it's easier to remember like that. What else do I remember in here? Yes. So the other one that I really like or explaining is that you can create functions like this. And you can also create functions like this. Function and then the body. And finally, you can create functions like this. Just using arrow format. So that's also important to remember. Make it a little bit bigger. There we go. Perfect. Speaking of functions, the other things that are critical in here, apart from the functional programming, is that JavaScript is typically like a synchronous. I hope I'm spelling that correctly. So I want you to remember the asynchronous and the await. You also have promises that we talked a little bit about, and many other different elements of that. I also taught you a little bit of how to create modules. Modules using functions and then closures, and different things like that. This is kind of my way of creating modules. But then you can also use ES6 modules. Let's call these Jones modules, which are created with that and the closures. And then in the ES6 modules, remember that you can do import, require, not require, import and export. And you can use named imports and then also default imports. Okay. What else am I remembering forgetting rather from this one? If you want to use JavaScript, you can also use it inline. You can also use it with script tag, and then you can also just script and then the source attribute, which is going to be for external files. And whenever you're using ES6 modules, remember that you can use, or you should use, like the type module, that you should put it in actually the package JSON, which is JSON. And we also have everything about NPM and all of those elements. Yes, and that is the other one. I remember that I wanted another one that will be like in this category. It's that remember to use linters and formatters like Prettier, although in the news this week they're like Vite is actually coming up with some alternatives for replacing that. And those are kind of like the main building blocks I can remember on the top of my head right now. It gives you like an idea of everything we have seen in there. But I want you also to remember that we have been talking as well about something which is like the different architectures for web development. And when I talk about architectures for web development, what I mean is, and actually have like a very messy Scully draw here, but remember like all of these things we have been saying, about the 2-tier client server, and then the 3-tier like client server and database, which is what we have been using. So whenever we think about this, and then let's see if I can find that, there we go. Let's connect these two. Basically, what we are talking about in here is that the most basic architecture that you can use is static files. And this is basically for the front end. Okay. So, and then basically what you want to create in here is that whenever you're creating like this type of static files, you want to have like an HTTP server HTTP server, which is the one that is actually going to be serving those files. And then for each one of those, then you can go and just have like each one of your different elements. And then whenever you're using these static files, you're just going to have like a client, which is going to be your browser. And then you're going to have your server, which in this case, I think we can put it like this. So we can have this one. So the client requests the files to the server. So this is going to be like static files, and this is kind of like our two-tier client-server architecture with static files and front-end rendering. And we have been doing that just using basic HTML and JavaScript and CSS. So I can go and connect these ones as well. But apart from that, we also saw like the three-tier client-server architecture, which is now using like this same concept, but it's adding, like it's replacing this HTTP server with a Node and Express server. And remember that Node, it's yet another one of the elements that we saw in here, which is for running JavaScript in the server side. So basically with this Node and Express, which actually like what matters the most in there is that you can create some routes, but you can also serve some JavaScript, some HTML and elements like that. And these routes that we have been creating, we call, I say that we say these are going to be like data endpoints mostly. And those data endpoints are the ones that we are using for a concept that I call, or not I call now, but it is called Ajax, which is basically the concept of rendering, modifying the HTML content or the DOM content using JavaScript, which is what this is all about. Okay, so I can put that in there. So in the three-tier, this is going to have these ones in there, but it's also going to have like a database. In this case, we are using MongoDB, which is a document database. It's a NoSQL document database. Sadly, we haven't had much time to cover much of Mongo, but we still have it down there. And then for each one of those, it's very important for you to remember that this one, we are using like front end, like front side rendered instead of using server side rendered, because all of the HTML and the contents of our front end is actually being developed or changed directly from the front end instead of changing from the back end. And yes, the other one that we do want in here is to remember about the JSON file, because like these data endpoints actually are going to be returning JSON. The other thing that we want to remember in here is that we have the HTTP protocol, and that the HTTP protocol is going to have like multiple verbs, including things like get, put, delete, and update, I think are the four. I hope I'm not mistaken. In here, there we go. Oh, I can make that really small. That's nice. And then you also should remember a little bit about the URLs, which are going to be a combination of first the protocol, then you can have the user, and then the password, and then the server, and then the port, and then the path for your file, and then the params, and then the anchor. And the anchor determines like how it is going to be, in what part of the page it is going to be rendered, and it can be also used for other things. So this is your typical URL, and that is the way that you're usually communicating here. In Mongo, as I said, we didn't see much, but I think I managed to mention that we do there is two ways in which you can query Mongo. One is MongoQL, Mongo query language, and the other one is the aggregation pipeline. And the other thing I want you to remember in here is that you're going to have like the Mongo server, which could be run using two alternatives. You can either run it locally, Mongo server local, and we did a demo on how to run in that using Docker, which was really cool. And then you can also do it, and I hope you did that for your deployment using Mongo Atlas, but that's just one example. You can also put it in your own server and then just put it in there for serving your Mongo. But then apart from the server, you're also going to have like your Mongo clients, and there's like 3 ways at least in which you can go and connect to Mongo. Then one is going to be the Mongo shell. The other one is going to be Mongo Compass, which is like our graphical user interface. Move that so I don't want to go to the next one. And the final way that we looked at was using the Node Mongo driver, MongoDB driver. Okay, and those are the ways in which you can be actually connecting to the server. Okay. Let's put it this way. Whenever you're doing MQL, remember that everything you're doing in here is going to be on JSON format. And then this one, if you remember, is going to have like the query, which is going to be in JSON format, but then you're also going to have like limit and sort and projection, I think it's called, or project, I think it's called. And then also with the limit, you also have skip. That is the one that we were using for pagination. And there is a ton of other things in there that you can be doing in your queries. Like for instance, you can go and do like regular expressions and the $sign, I think it's how it is done in there. That $sign is actually more useful in the aggregation pipeline, where you actually have different phases and you can do group bys and you can do filters and like even joins and different elements in there. Remember, I recommend you to go and take a look if you want to get better at this. Go and take a look at the Mongo Academy for learning more on that. And that is kind of like the general idea of what we have been seeing in the architectures. This is the one we use for project 1. This is the one we use for project 2. And then we are going to be like this is front side rendered HTML and ES6. Okay. And then we are going to be using a new one for the final projects, which is also that one, but instead of using standard HTML, we are going to be using React. Okay, and that's what is going to happen in project 3 and actually in project 4 as well. And we are also going to be learning about other concepts in there. Actually, it should do it for this one. Other concepts where we are going to be learning about security and design and accessibility, usability, and many other of those ones in there. So, but that's what comes in the second part of the class. Okay, so I hope this is a good reminder of everything we have learned. I am probably missing a ton of things in there, but just to give you an example on what you need to have fresh on the top of your head whenever, like for instance, applying for a job for web development.